Good, good, good
Morning.
Oh, we can work on that.
Yeah, we can.
Let's start our own two-man barbershop quartet.
Yeah.
Wait, I don't have any rhythm.
Oh,
Damn it! Oh.
Guess it's over before it started.
Yeah, well,
Does it
that's
happen to you
okay.
often?
I
That it's
don't-
over before it started?
Yeah, I get really tempted and too excited, and then
Yeah. Well, as I'm sitting here drinking my coffee, I had a great suggestion the other day from somebody that we should get some Helpful for Life mugs. As much as we were drinking coffee on this show, we might as well get our own product placement. Yeah. America.
this is America right here.
Yeah.
This is everywhere Reed has been. For those of you that have amazing eyesight and
Here we
pixels
go.
don't bother you. Oh, there.
Ooh.
Ooh,
Ooh.
ooh.
Just ignore that big thing behind the mug.
the mean mug behind the mug.
The mean mug behind the mug. Welcome to the morning show. I'm Reed Garcia.
This is Ryder Richards.
And today is Thursday, October 21st, 2021. Cheers to you.
Ba-ding, you made it this far.
Mm.
We're all proud of you.
Or if you didn't and you're still listening, please be nice to me.
That's all we really want in life.
Yes.
Yeah.
I just don't want spirits haunting me and making my life miserable.
Yeah, that makes sense. I live most of my life thinking about that. Yeah, about 70 or 80 times a day. Just don't screw up so their ghost comes back and haunts you.
Yes, I
Yeah.
mean, honestly, it's not a bad way to live life, right? Having these fake or real, however you want to look at it,
Yeah,
right?
right.
It is a strong word there, but these stories that you're telling yourself that could be true, could be not, but as long as you tell yourself that, it forces you to live a certain way. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're kind of doing most of the time anyway. Most of the stories we tell ourselves probably have very little impact, but sometimes they can change our behavior for the better. Yeah, I don't know. I was listening to a podcast yesterday that was about the paradox of death and talking about consciousness and death and all this kind of stuff. And it just really, I think about death maybe once a day.
Wow, that often, huh?
Yeah, well, I do it as a journaling exercise.
Ah.
Otherwise, I don't think about it at all.
Okay, all right.
So yeah, I'm not like morbid, but the idea that would be sort of the memento mori. If you were to die today, like what kind of person will you have wanted to be?
How long have you been doing that for?
Oh, a couple months.
What do you think so far? You're still alive, so that's going for you.
Well, the one thing that it's made interesting is like all I have written down in my journaling prompt is death. And so it's like, I think it's like I have categories that is gratitude and grave. So I do one that's on gratitude, one on the grave. And so when I die, then the idea would just be like, okay, is this what kind of person you want to be when you die? Is this what you want to do before you die? It's just, you can start breaking it down into various things. Like, are you afraid of death? Like, you can start jumping around after you've been doing it for a while because you get bored trying to answer the same question. And of course, you also find out how, like, sort of shallow and narcissistic you are.
Yeah.
I want people to weep really hard at my funeral. It's like...
Well, I want to point out, because I have this friend who, anytime you slightly missay something, he'll correct you and be like, oh, that's really bad grammar. And so I just want to point out that the word death is not a question. That's just a word.
Yeah, thank you. It is just a word. But most words are just words. So...
Well, that's an interesting thing to be doing. And on one hand, some people might be like, oh, that's dark. You think about death every day. But on the other hand, it's like, you think about death every day, so maybe you're taking some of the darkness out of it. Is that part of it?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is the memento mori thing is you would think it would be morbid, but it's really a celebration of life because you're actually considering, yes, I could die, but it's also, let's focus on the present if that's the case. If you know this thing is coming for you, what's really important? What are your priorities? Who do you want to be? What kind of individual are you going to be today? And living as if each day was your last, not in the sort of, let's knock everything off the bucket list kind of way, but as in, I want to be kinder to the people I love. I want to be more open. I want to be more vulnerable. I want to be more authentic, because these are all traits that, I could see myself having on the deathbed. as I become an older person, I want to think of myself in certain ways. And that's sort of a psychological thing that I think guys like Viktor Frankl talk about, right? Is he's a man's search for meaning, but he sort of talks about on your deathbed, how do you see yourself? And if you see yourself on there as being a kind and forgiving person that doesn't have enemies, well, then maybe you can get rid of some of that petty little regrets that you're carrying around with you today.
Yeah, well, it's funny because I was just listening. Stupid mic stand. I was just listening to two podcasts yesterday that happened to touch on a similar type of theme. And actually, one was a Adam Buxton podcast, which I went and checked in right
It
afterwards.
really was his name.
It really was his name. I was trying to give him as much
Andrew
of a plug
Buxton.
as possible.
Yeah.
This mic stand is going to be the death of me, but
It's so limp.
so limp and
Just tired.
yeah, it's mostly been in the
Is it
same
the
position,
morning read?
you
Is
know.
that what- Yeah.
Yeah, it needs just a little bit of encouragement. I'm not going to do that. So anyways, the Adam Buxton, he was interviewing David Sedaris, who is a humorist and an essayist, and those might be two words that some people have no idea what they are. And I was in that boat. I was like, what does that even mean? And why would I want to read an essay? I wrote them in school. Like, what do you think about essayists?
Oh man, I'm a big fan.
Yeah.
Essay. Yeah.
Essay?
Hey,
Essay.
orderly essay.
That's a good story,
Yeah,
man.
see, so of course, growing up in New Mexico, then there was a lot of that. But yeah,
Essayists?
essayists. There were all essays everywhere.
It makes me think of like some sort of Key and Peele sketch where you're like walking down the street and like you think it's gonna be like this big gang of like a bunch of cholos like stabbing each other, and then they just start like
Pull out all these documents that are pinning small like treatises. And,
Yeah.
whatever manifestos.
But anyways, essayists. So you're into them.
Yeah,
huh?
no, I like them. I think that oftentimes it is fascinating, and I think Reed and I might cover this later in the podcast, but sometimes people have maybe one good idea, and that should only be an essay. That should only be 2 to 10, 20 pages. That's all you need. You don't need an entire 200-page book because
Right.
you had one idea. So that's one reason I'm a fan of essays, is I don't actually think most ideas need as much space as people use up.
Yeah, well, I mean, we talked about that, I think, yesterday a little bit about how some books are like, you have the summaries and stuff like that and the main takeaways, and that's really all you need. And maybe in that case, an essay would have been more apt. But yeah, and then there's also the aspect of the perception of the thing and the fact that there's more of it or it's longer, or like, if someone hands you like, this is a life-changing thing and it's a packet, like, versus like, here's this hefty book with a picture and a signature and it's hardcover, like which one has more of an impact? Because I mean, that's a real factor as well, right? Which this is completely random, but it popped in my head, so I figured I'd share it. And jazz, there's this thing called the Blue Book. I'm hoping I'm not messing up the name, but basically it's
That's
back
also the name of a CIA operation.
so maybe it's the same thing.
Same thing.
That's how they infiltrated the underground. But the the Blue Book, or whatever name it is that's close to that, is back in the day when they had all these songs that they wanted to play, but you had all the sheet music that, if you wanted sheet music, you needed to buy the sheet music, right? So jazz, a lot of musicians, especially up and coming ones, like they wanted to have all of this music, but they wanted to, not have to pay for it. And so this was a collection of, I don't know, somewhere between 50 and 150 of like the most popular songs from that era. But not only that, they got transcribed in a way that was this kind of standard of jazz at the time, and it also kind of became that standard, and people basically, it got photocopied and then it got moved, it went all over the country, right? And as it got photocopied, and then it was in every club. So, but it was just this little packet of photocopied paper, like you could buy it from some dude on the corner or whatever. Anyways, there's my random book tangent for you.
Thanks. No, it's I kind of like that. I also like the idea of this dispersal of information and getting people what they need. I think that's fantastic. It's one of the like dreams of the internet, and I think it's one of the dreams that's as technology increases, is starting to dissipate in a lot of ways. It's interesting because it's just taking on a different form, right? We're giving out information right now on the podcast for free, but there is this other kind of side of wanting to get all the movies, wanting to get all the music. There's a whole ring of people that grandmas that trade quilting patterns illegally. It's just like there's weird little rings of people around the world that are using the internet for all this free information. So there's something about that desire, like people wanting to have it for free, wanting to have access to it, and then also watching how it morphs over time. That's really quite fun.
Yeah, there's a lot in there that we could dive into. Naturally, like the creation of the internet, the advertising supported model, the free versus paid, the connection of money with value, and what that looks like from a creator's or business perspective, both a small business and a large business. There's a whole bunch we could get into that, but whether or not we get into that, let's first talk about yesterday. Yesterday was Tuesday.
Yes, it was Tuesday.
Actually, it was Wednesday because that's how days work.
What a curveball. Yeah. So what did you do with your day yesterday, Reed?
Yesterday, I was, that's a great question. I would pull up my notebook and tell you all of the things that I did, but I'll go off the top of my head here. So some of the things that I did is, I'm working behind the scenes with our good old buddy Danny. We're going through a bunch of our old episodes, and we're starting to chop them up into smaller pieces so they're easier to digest and share. And, for people who don't want to sit here for an hour, or they do, but then they want to share just a certain part, or they say, oh, that part you said about people having empty heads, I know just the guy I'm going to send that one to. So working on that type of thing, and then working on the process of taking the video and turning in, creating a transcript from it and uploading captionings, and then we'll put it on all these various platforms, Facebook and all those types of things. We'll put it on our website. We want to have it in a way where you can see what topics we talked about every day. You can sort by category. So we're going to be doing all of these things to give a very rich, hopefully, end experience for the user. And we want it to be kind of a two-way street, like one from a discovery point of view, especially for people who are new or are just wanting to learn more or dive in more, like, oh, I want to learn a little bit more about finance. So then you click the button and see the finance, and it shows you all the times we talked about finance, or even from, kind of like we were talking about yesterday with the way your brain works, and a little bit about Rome. Maybe if you're trying to use it from a recall perspective, like, oh, I know they were talking about that one thing that one time. And so then you could go to this database and see, all right, I know it was during this week, and I know it was related to romance. And so then you put in these filters and you could see, and that could help you find what you're looking for. So that's one of the things that we're kind of working on behind the scenes, is making all that magic happen.
Great. Yeah, no, that's, with my own podcast, I've done a little bit of that, and I don't know if people really understand how time intensive and it's, I wouldn't say it's necessarily difficult, but it's a very time intensive process to chop things up to make it easier on other people to consume. And you can spend days doing something like that just for one episode.
Yeah, I mean, I've been dealing cocaine for many, many years, so I know where you take the bulk and you chop it up and you fill it in with a little bit of, baking powder. I got baking soda.
I don't know. I think there are people that enjoy that. I find that process to be difficult and a little bit tedious. So, by the way, if anyone wants to do it for free for me, come on over.
What a plug. Plug.
Did I sell it? Did I really sell it right there?
They seem, wait, hold on. Give him like a poor puppy dog eyes face.
I don't even know where I was looking.
Oh, that's okay. That's how puppies are. They just
so wiggly.
For those of you like, what do puppies have to do with anything?
Yeah,
we actually talked about puppies a couple days ago.
Yeah, because they make me happy.
Yes.
And, I was talking about them, a little baby puppy wiggling on your face being such a beautiful moment. So yeah, if you will chop up all of my podcast content and put it on social media, I will wiggle on your face.
Yes, that is a lovely plug. And I will also say that I'm sitting here thinking about Dexter and serial killers, and thinking of other times you might be chopping something up, or
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Warm
do you
and
think
fuzzy.
that would be pleasant?
Getting chopped up?
Depends on which side of the table you're
Yeah,
on, I guess.
well, I don't know. I'm just gonna say no to the whole thing. Like, I was one of the podcasts I was listening to was talking about doping people with something that makes you lose consciousness. And this is, of course, instantly, I was just like, if I was getting tortured or chopped apart, I would want to be unconscious.
If I had the choice,
Yeah, I think that would be a much better way to go. So
I think there's only a small percentage of people who would disagree with you, and they're called either sadists or masochists. I forget which one is hurting
masochist,
the life
I
of
would
himself.
think, but I don't know.
Yeah. So yesterday, we were talking about what I did yesterday, yesterday. That's what we were talking about. I mentioned some of the things we were doing behind the scenes. Another thing we're working on is figuring out the structure of this podcast and how much structure to have, and how much structure is a good thing, and how do you make sure you don't overcomplicate it, which might talk about all those things here in a little bit. But yesterday, remind me, if you can, what some of the things we talked about in our episode yesterday.
Oh man, we went off on highlights. That was primarily what we sort of jumped into, and different ideas about remembering things and searching for things. Also got into, at one point you sort of brought up taking your skills and mapping those out onto something like an Excel spreadsheet or some sort of note-taking software, just so that you have sort of a running tally of things that you're good at and things that you have done in your life, so you can look back and be like, oh yeah, I actually am productive and a good person, those kind of things. So I remember those pretty clearly. And then it kind of got foggier toward the end. I think my brain started shorting out.
Classic.
Yeah,
Is that empty
it's
space,
that huge empty space. It's not or negative space, whatever. We're talking about just filling that full of just random words that I can just throw out that probably are not used in the right context.
Yeah. No, that's good. So then for the challenge yesterday, do you remember exactly what we said on that one? That one.
Oh, we kind of had two of them at the end. Neither one of them was the skills Excel sheet, though. So, no, I'm drawing a blank.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at as well. My highlights are not so bright.
We didn't
right
highlight our own highlights.
Yeah, we didn't highlight our own highlights. But that's okay. We will get back to that at some point.
Yeah. Huh. Now I'm all curious. I'll probably be thinking about it the rest of the podcast episode. So if y'all see me like gazing off into space.
Oh, that's not just your puppy dog face, huh?
No, that's my pretend to be thinking writer. That's what I do. Yeah. It got me through most of school.
Yeah.
They just asked me a question. I just look off to the right, up a little bit. I just sit there for 15 minutes.
Well, knowing that you did art and stuff, where my brain went was you posing nude for people to paint you just like this, and that's how you paid your way through school.
Reed, hey, who have you been talking to?
And with that, let's roll the intro. Helpful for life. So, welcome back. I'm Reed Garcia. For those of you just joining us, this is the morning show.
This is Ryder Richards. Also, for those of y'all just joining us.
For those of you who have been here this whole time, don't worry about us.
Thank you. Thank you. Comment. Let us know what we can do to actually make this episode good.
Yes, please do. And if you guys don't say anything, we'll assume it's perfect.
Cricket. Yeah.
Oh,
nothing.
Perfect. Oh, this is great.
Another perfect podcast
in the drain.
Episode.
In the hoop. Some successful phrase.
Yes.
In the goal.
Yes.
Touchdown.
Ooh, boy. So I'm. I'm not gonna talk anymore.
No, you please.
What?
Interjection.
Yeah, that's about right. Well, now I forgot what I was going to say.
Oh, so that might be one of the benefits of having some structure. So tell us about what structure means for you, Ryder.
Oh, man. I think of architecture. I think of girders and beams and stuff like that.
Girdles, huh?
Not girdles. Well, sometimes. They have a lot of structure in them.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, I guess they are providing a similar type of thing.
Yeah, yeah, except for maybe a sort of detrimental structure. But anyway, yeah, I don't know. I instantly sort of start. I have a minor in architecture from Texas Tech when I went there, so I naturally sort of
Get your
get your
guns
guns
up.
up. So I naturally think about structure in that way. As I just all of a sudden started envisioning axionometric designs and little, CAD drawings and stuff like that about architecture. So that's one way to sort of handle structure. It makes it easy to talk about getting your foundation right and all that kind of stuff, and cross bracing and things like that. But there's also the other kind of structure, which is things like how I structure my day, for instance, which would be kind of routines and habits.
Yeah. So, okay, if we're gonna let's run with this analogy of architecture. You know, the study of buildings, and I guess is there a broader definition than that? Does it require buildings? I mean, yeah. What is it? How would you define architecture, Mr. Minor? Do you need the major to?
I
Do you
think you
need
have to
the major to figure that
I
one
think
out?
you have to be a doctorate to figure
Yeah.
that one out. No, I mean architecture's strange in that way because primarily I think what makes it a little bit different is it tends to be for spaces for people to inhabit.
Okay.
I think otherwise you might just be using engineers for things. But they probably have also, there's probably been bleed of the term over time, just
Sure.
like with art, where now art can be architecture, architecture can be art, all these kind of things. But yeah, I would sort of talk about. We talked a lot about the thing like a living space, some space that a person would inhabit that they would move through. So almost everything was sort of based around those ideas. Utilizing the psychology of humans to create space. So that was a big reason for at least architecture being a singular thing rather than you just, I don't know, learning how to build a vacuum. I don't think that that is necessarily architecture, but there is some sort of design and engineering that goes into
Yeah.
it.
To me, architecture kind of holds the space between. I say it's a mix between um, interior design and even just kind of design as a larger term, because it's not just interior, it's exterior as well, right? But and civil engineering, because it's a little bit of both, right? You are building things that have this structure, have this support, are able to do all of the things needed for honestly kind of behind the scenes fade into the background that you don't really want or need or think about as an average person, but you need or
Yeah,
at least
yeah.
help you run. But then it also has at least good architecture keeps in mind things like design and how certain things make people act, how certain things make people think, and how they make people interact either with the space or with each other. All those types of things are, in my mind, important in architecture, and that's what separates someone from just being an okay architecture from being an architect, rather, to being a really good architect. So I think it's actually a really good analogy for structure and stuff for like when you're looking at your own life, because it is like exactly all those things, right? You need to figure out what are so yeah. So let's use the we got a foundation, right, which is in architecture usually a big old thing of concrete that sits underneath the ground and is supposed to last for 30 years, and that's what supports all the structure, the outer structure of the building. Why don't you give the brief overview of your shed building, because that's
Oh man,
a pretty
yeah.
good structure without too much going on outside of the structure itself.
Yeah, yeah. And I think an episode or two ago we brought up this sort of Venturi Brown learning from Las Vegas, in which they talk about how Americans tend to build things like a box, and then we just put a label on it, and the box being this kind of simple structure that you can build. So when we're doing the shop, what I was sort of finding, I mentioned that it's hard to be creative because of budgetary concerns, right? So for me to get a 30 by 40 foot shop, that was a certain price tag because those come nearly prefabbed. That's a regular dimension and a size, so it was kind of like, okay, well I can get this for a lot less. And then we started going into the foundation, so we ended up having to scrape the dirt off in a certain area, and then they actually came back in with different soil, and they built that soil up so that everything was level, and that was a sand base soil. and they call it like premium fill or something like this. So then they fill in this space, they build a little sand block out there, and then they come back with tractors and they dig back into the sand block to make your foundation. So your foundation ends up having cross bracing and beams in it, and it has footers. And up here, the footers are supposed to be 18 inches deep, but we went with 24 because we went overkill on everything with my shop.
Do you have a big truck?
I have a truck. Are you saying I'm
No,
compensating?
not just asking.
Okay,
Just
yeah.
asking.
So then we put in twice as much rebar because the clay and the soil moves up here. So this is one of the reasons I think a foundation is important, because if you don't get your foundation right and you don't have a strong one, well, you're just going to see cracks in the future, and it's going to break apart and cause a lot of other problems for
Yeah,
you.
and it, by the way, is used as a analogy or teaching mechanism in all sorts of things, including religion. That's something I know I for sure heard. When I was growing up in the Christian culture, laying that. There's
Oh,
actually a song on Christ, the solid rock I stand.
Yeah.
He's like my
Yeah.
foundation.
Oh man,
right?
if only he had some rebar inside too. That would be so great.
Right? He's like,
Yeah.
wait, can Christ have a curved wall?
Yeah, right. Can we do some post-tension Christ?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Christ, I know you're right now this deep, but I need you to give me a couple more inches to
need-
give me that
Oh,
extra
don't have-
structure. That's not sacrilegious at all, is
no,
it?
not at all.
Ah.
No, there's also, we were talking about rebar, but there's also a form that's post-tension where you actually run cables through the concrete, and then those are tightened from the outside to compress the concrete together.
Yeah. Well, I never didn't think it would come up this naturally, but one of our friends who hopped on a couple weeks ago and made a comment. His name was Grady.
Yeah.
He's a civil engineer. He and I went to college together, and he has a YouTube channel called Practical Engineering. So if any of this talk about civil engineering gets you going, and talk about, he has all sorts of videos on concrete, the different types of bracing and things like that. So go check out his channel if you're interested in that, Practical Engineering. But one thing I wanted to point out that I really liked as a metaphor, and as an important thing to point out, was the first step they did when they were building the foundation was they actually took some stuff away.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important analogy for what we could do in our lives. Like the first thing we want to do, and we're ready to go, we're ready to improve, we're ready to do better with our lives, as we try and start layering on all these things that we think are good. We start downloading those extra, operating systems, to use that analogy we've used a few times, that extra software, just putting it on top. But, the first thing you got to do is maybe dig deep and get rid of some things and scrape away some of that stuff, which, guess what? You maybe didn't have as much to do with. You didn't choose that dirt that was going to be there. That just happened to be there because of where you were, right?
Yes,
And because of all the years and years that came before you, that is what is that soil as you're working with. But it's up to you to scrape out that soil, to take away that dirt, and then you grab the dirt that you bring in, and you may have to pay for. You may have to learn some lessons of your own.
Some premium fill.
Some premium fill. So here we are, premium fill. So filling that dirt in to then pour the concrete. And concrete, by the way, is, it's not a ton of things. It's basically sand and water, and there's usually some kind of aggregate in there, which is a fancy way of saying small rocks. And then there's some reinforcing structure, which we've alluded to a couple times, which rebar is just a big old pole of iron. Are you familiar with big old poles of iron? But those just kind of go through in this this grid pattern inside of the concrete to give it more structure, more rigidity, and that's what helps it last longer and keeps it from being, just a playpen that lasts for, a couple days versus a pad of concrete that lasts for 30 years, right? So that's one of the things you've been thinking about a lot as you've been making your shed, is how do I not only make this something that's good for me now, but how this is something that will be good for me for decades, until I die, right? I mean, to use your prompt, right?
I mean, I want this thing to outlast me. And maybe it will, maybe it won't. But the idea that you could up front do a few harder things. The funny thing is, it's very exciting once the shop is up to like move all your stuff inside. But I'm having to even go slow on that because I want to do things in the right order, in the right way. And so it's making the process, it's drawing the process out longer. But I'm getting a certain kind of pleasure out of knowing that everything I'm doing has been thought through and will be executed in the right way. And so I think with structure, that's one of the things is when you start looking at it, then all of a sudden you start having to plan out all the other steps around it. What do you have to do here? What do you have to do here? And that structure can kind of build itself. I think the fun thing is, of course, is to start playing with the toys at the end. But it just might take more time. And I'm having to actually slow myself down a lot and be like, calm down. It's okay. You will have this building the rest of your life or however long we stay there.
Yeah.
But I'm going to have this thing. And it's okay if it takes an extra 2 months now. So that might also be a little bit of an analogy is doing the hard work up front. It can pay off in the long run.
Well, I just want to go on record here on this live video camera that, Ryder, you don't have any kids.
I don't.
If you need somebody to will things to, I will carry on in your steed. I will put up a gravestone that has all of your journal entries about death on it. We have plenty of land to work with. I'll put up multiple gravestones. We'll do a Ryder chant every day. Oh, Ryder.
Actually, this is getting a little worse. I was okay at first, but now I'm saying the ends that you would go to. It's smacking of desperation. I need you to actually play it really cool, Reed.
You've just really played up the shed so much. I mean, which is it? Am I supposed to love it? Am I not supposed to love it?
But you're supposed to do it in this classical Southern male way of being like, it's all right.
Yeah. Not
cool.
Oh, cool shed, bro.
Yeah, nice, bro.
Yeah. Except they probably don't say bro like this.
No, bro.
That's what we're good at. Classic Southern men.
We're actually
give me a Bud Light, would you? Yeah, I used to be drinking Bud Heavy, but wife said I need to cut back, so I switched to Bud Light.
Yeah, I've got a neighbor that only drinks Corona Premium, and I was like, "What is premium?" Apparently, it's like 90 calories.
Well, the trick is premium actually means less. They took out some of the flavor.
Yeah,
they took out some of the back when bread beer used to be liquid bread. You wanted it for that.
You wanted all the extra calories.
But now you don't.
Because they have Corona Extra. And now I think that's just Corona Original. Anyway, I'm really confused.
The naming conventions and marketing these days, they just had new Apple computers which came out, and it's like, oh, now we've got the M1 Pro and the M1 Max. Which one's better? I mean, it could be either one. I don't know.
Confusing.
Oh, my goodness. So get back to the structure, and we're using the analogy of architecture. We talked about the importance of laying the foundation, taking away the things that are underneath, putting down the soil that's good, laying down a good foundation, ideally with the help of others or people who have studied the work and they know, like, hey, if you do it this way, it's less likely to crack. In this particular environment, you need to be aware of these environmental concerns. And, to use our analogy in real life, right? Maybe these people are around, maybe the politics are in this way, maybe you have certain family dynamic. So you're working with lovely people and lovely things like Helpful for Life to help you create that foundation. And then what do you do after that? What is next on the foundation? Oh, one last thing I wanted to point out was we were mentioning, like, it's okay to recognize that process is going to take time, and to not have that, to use the analogy of HGTV, right? It's like we talked about that in the past about how, you see in 30 minutes, people go from horrible shed to break it all down, fix everything in the world, and then they turn it all around within 28 hours, right?
Yeah.
And then so being a little more realistic about that and recognizing, okay, maybe I just need to work on one part at a time. Maybe I need to set up this thing and recognize that this is going to take, months for me to get going, or maybe years,
Well, and I took notes on this process because I was just kind of like, okay, originally I was promised we would get started by this date, and then that date shifted, and that date shifted. And so what I found out was that everything took about 6 weeks longer than you would anticipate. But once the building got started, it was great. We were chugging along, but also there ended up having to be compromises made where you're changing subcontractors in the middle of it. You're doing all these kind of things. And so it was difficult. And these people that you're working with to help create this thing for you, especially if they're experts in their field, what's so funny about it is you're paying these people to come out and do something that they're probably really good at, but you have to watch them constantly. And this is a very interesting idea that I'm just sort of was blown away. It's like you just poured this beautiful concrete slab and then the first thing you do is come remove the forms and you break the slab around the edges wherever you pour, like, you made this thing and now you're destroying this thing, right? And so there's this weird sort of paradox that comes in there where these people that you're going to be relying on to help you build your structures or your systems, you might love them, they might be great people, but you've got to be protective as well of some of these systems and structures that you're putting into place, because these are for you, that's for long term. And I think sometimes that can be a little bit off-putting, but it also requires being the kind of person who isn't afraid of confrontation.
Yeah.
You have to go out of your way sometimes to say, look, this is what we're building and you're messing it up.
Yeah, if you're just completely passive and you don't stand up for what you want, what you believe, for what you're going to do, like as you're trying to build your foundation, you know, to take it to the life, you know, real life, like as you're trying to change your life, as you're trying to take some things away, which may involve, hey, spending less time with certain people in your life that you recognize are incongruent. They don't go with the life that you want for yourself. There are people who may be, you know, sucking that idea of life out of you, or for whatever reason they're opposed, or maybe they're not incentivized the same way you are, and so for whatever reason, like if those are people that you need to get out of your life or at least minimize your time with, that's part of the thing you take away. And again, so there's that resistance that you'll have to fight through. But one other thing that I wanted to ask you about, Ryder, was what about, you know, just it needs to be more perfect. I mean, have you run into that?
Yeah, no, the GC that I was working with, the general contractor on this,
general contractor.
Yeah, of course, he wanted to get everything done quickly, but also to his own levels. And so in a lot of ways, though, he was kind of a coach in that way. Like he knew things that I wouldn't have thought about to ask for or to request or to get. Each one of those costs more money. So there was that as well, of like just kind of being like, okay, this is, I don't know if we necessarily need that, but okay, I guess we're getting it. You know, and so there was this kind of idea that I had to at times put my own sort of thoughts and ego aside and take somebody else's advice on those kind of things. So for instance, we got extra cross bracing within it. We got the closed cell spray foam insulation, which is a higher cost than just doing batten insulation or something like that. But then it would look bad over time because it yellows. So then all of a sudden we need to spray paint the entire interior of the shop. Each one of these things, extra couple $1,000, right? And you just go, oh, ouch, this hurts, right? But at the end of the day, you have a better product and a better shop. So that was one of the sort of lessons we went through. There were people, the subcontractors, who would come through and just be like, and you had to like really keep them on task. And then there were other people like my GC who wanted to make the thing amazing. And then I had to even at some point push back against him. We can't do anymore.
Right.
We are out of money. You know, and so there becomes this kind of negotiation process through there. And I think maybe one of these days I should just write all of this up and put it into almost like article form, so people can see like where I ran into trouble, where these kind of issues happen, what it taught me as a person, like how I need to behave within these contexts. We were also talking earlier about, you know, making jokes about the sort of, you know, Bud Light crowd or whatever. And there were some very tense situations on the job site on occasion because these people, some of the subcontractors were angry, or they came from just sort of a different realm in which it was okay to like just verbally or physically fight.
Yeah.
And if you come from sort of a white collar world where that's not common, this could be really shocking to you. So in an interesting way, I actually had, you know, my GC is the kind of guy that can transition between both worlds. And I was like, thank goodness I had this guy around.
Yeah. So earlier when you were talking about the various craftsmen and people that work on their thing, you know, something very important popped into my head, which I wanted to ask you.
Oh no.
Oh no, where does this go?
Here we go.
Well, Ryder. Do you know? See,
I feel like he's stalling.
Yeah, he is stalling because
I think that empty space.
He has a joke.
To circle.
He has a joke that he can't remember the setup for.
Oh no.
Yeah, it's the worst. It's the worst.
When you were talking earlier about the getting yourself into a situation that wasn't toxic, and there might be people that are in your life you might have to cut out. It made me think of what is the show? We Live in the Shadows or
Oh
whatever.
yeah.
Yeah,
What they do in the shadows, or something
yes,
like that.
yes,
That's
where
a
they
show about vampires, a
yeah,
comedy mockumentary
yeah,
type
where
show.
they have the psychic vampire Colin who just keeps talking to people until they just like fall asleep.
he,
He just like sucks their soul out.
he was one of my favorite
Yeah, he
characters.
was
I
so
liked
good.
him a lot, and of course I liked Guillermo. Oh man, well I'm gonna mess up the setup, but hopefully those who know the joke will have a small chuckle when they hear that it's referenced. Um, you know, the question is, did you know about? Uh, did you know that the scarecrow was a really good expert? Did you know that?
No, I did not.
Yeah, they say he
Why?
was really outstanding in his field.
Oh.
Thank you, thank you,
Oh.
thank you. But
A part of me just died.
so we're talking about the structure, foundation. We talked about taking things away, building the foundation on top, recognizing that you may have to compromise some of the things and not strive completely for perfection because of reality and budgetary and being realistic about the timeline. Things are going to take longer than you expect. But on top of that foundation, you start to build, the fancy words you were using were like cross beams and girders and
Yes.
studs and studs. But
Yeah,
all
we
these,
had like purlins, and you have load-bearing walls, and you have things like that. So, yeah, these kind of structures, the even the arch, right? The arch serves certain purposes. For
one of the oldest architectural things. It's so
yes.
simple, but yet that's one of the strongest types of supports. The arch.
Right, because there's even a post and lintel where you have the two verticals and then you put the top on it. The problem is early, before we are doing a whole lot of great long lasting architecture, that was the part that would break, was the part that went over the doorway, the lintel, so to speak. And so it would sag over time and it would break. So whenever you actually create an arch, then the gravity gets distributed downward across the force. And then you have things like keystones, which is the stone right at the top in the center of the arch. And that is a very special piece that actually closes it together and then helps distribute the gravity. So there's things like that. So these architectural terms that come up in daily life
Right.
that are, really based off of how you're dispersing gravity and pressure.
Yeah, keystone, and then another one is cornerstone, which is usually in a reference to some sort of rectangular type of building or whatever. The cornerstone is the strong one that you build everything upon, and these are also analogies used in business and things like that as well. And I will just wanted to mention that when you're talking about the arch, there's the St. Louis Arch in St. Louis. And the Gateway Arch, I think, is probably the technical term. But there's actually a national park underneath the arch, which is really good, and it's free, and they have amazing hours because they are in a downtown area. They recognize a lot of people come after work, so they're open on a weeknight until like 8 or 9 or something like that. And so if you're ever in St. Louis, go check it out. Just go walk through. They've got some cool stuff about Lewis and Clark and like the westward expansion and the Manifest Destiny, and it talks a little bit about the different cultural groups involved, African Americans and of course the Indian or Native Americans. Talks about all of that type of stuff. But one of the other things they talk about is the construction of the arch and how they built it and how they had that keystone or whatever it's called in the middle, and that was fascinating for me to learn about, especially as an engineer. But yeah, so when we're talking about the structure and you're building the walls, what would you say kind of are providing that structure of your walls? How would you use that analogy with life?
Yeah, I think that, man, that one's an interesting one because once you're off the foundation, right? Once you're up in the air, then there's a danger of collapse. When you're at the foundational level, you haven't risen, right? You haven't built anything. Yeah, I mean, you've made a nice foundation, but there's no risk of danger. There's no risk of collapse at that point. You can just stay there forever if you want. But once you start actually building up, which might be achievements or ambition or something like that, or maybe you're just trying to create a shelter for yourself, right? Something to make your life easier in the future. There's something about that keystone, which is this kind of moment when you can actually start building around something. You actually get that arch into place, and you lock, and this keystone locks in all the pressure. And this is one of those. The reason it's so important is because if that doesn't fit properly, or if that breaks over time, then the arch crumbles. But then the walls around the wall, arch also break. So you end up with a major problem. So there are certain elements that are just going to take you more time, and they're more specific, and they take a level of expertise. Maybe even you might consider mastery. So while we can build sort of, you could do it in phases. We've seen this architecturally through the eons, right? Is that people will do things that are mud huts, and then they work their way up to building with something else, to wood, to stone. All of a sudden it's now steel and concrete.
Yeah.
So there might be something about taking it in phases and just sort of gradually building yourself up to these things, making sure that you gain expertise as you go so that you have comfort within each phase and learning from those.
Yeah. So, that's making me think about when we were talking the other day about some of the architecture in Latin American countries. And we were talking about how they build their first floor and then they leave the rebar exposed to later build on the second floor.
Right.
And although it may not be as pretty from the outside, it's investing in the future and it's leaving those things available. So as they get more time, as they get more resources, as they get more money, they can then layer on more and more. So I really like that analogy for building the structure of your own life is, all right, let's start with something that you can build today and you can have, it's going to be solid, it's going to last, but you're giving yourself the availability and the time and the space to, in the future, expand and make it stronger. And, kind of like we were talking about, it's a great analogy here in America, everyone builds the best thing right away, and it's actually not as good for the long term because it leaves no room for expansion. And an example that popped in my head, which I didn't mention the other day, was I saw this house that had this awesome, really big wall of windows, basically, and then they built like an external building right in front of it. And I'm like, you guys just blocked like all of your view and your light. Like, what do you?
Oh man! So these are the things that drive you berserk when you go through architecture, right? Is that all the suburbs you're driving around in? Like, what is probably the most, I don't know, off-putting feature of most suburban houses? A garage. Yet you're going to put it right in the front of the house. Like, there's these little things that start going through your mind. This is the face of your house, and you're putting the butt right up there with the face,
Some people like that.
Some people do like that, yeah. So, but, there's little things like that where we get caught up into doing things because other people do them without considering them. But also, whenever you have something like you spent all this time and energy making a glass wall so you can see out into nature, and then you block that view because of some other set of considerations. And this comes back to sort of planning and structuring and all those things that we keep talking about. If you do have sort of a structure that's long term, you can plan around that and you can make changes. Sometimes the other problem is people are not willing to scrape back off what they've already built. Sometimes you build something out of wood and then you learn that it should have been made out of stone or concrete.
Right.
And it's okay to go back to the foundation and start over again, just taking that previous knowledge that you gained and using that and rolling that and moving it forward. So this is kind of a big fear that people have, and Naval Ravikant has talked about this, how people, especially in business, they're here and they think that that's where they need to be, but they can't see how to get up to the top of the mountain. The path is blocked. Well, sometimes you might have to walk all the way back down to the bottom and start over again. Great artists
or you're walking
do
up a
this.
different mountain, right?
Yeah, you go start something else. Great artists change paths all the time, and then the old fans are always angry at them.
Yeah, and to use another analogy that a lot of people could probably relate to, sports. So Tiger Woods, in the middle of his career, completely changed his swing, and a lot of people are like, "Oh, this is the death of his career," blah blah blah. But then he came back stronger after he was able to reanalyze, get rid of all of those bad habits he had built up, and then start anew, right? So there's value in doing that. I was thinking about some of the analogies that I like to think of with the structure, with the walls, and let's stick with the idea of a four-walled square rectangle type of thing, right?
Sure.
Well, guess what? As you're building that structure, you get to decide in your life what are those four walls for you, right? And what are the things that are important to you? What are the things that provide you that structure, that rigidity, that ability for you to build more things off of and attach things off of, and maybe those are things like journaling and mindfulness and planning out your day and reviewing your week or your month or your year, things like that, and not in a New Year's resolution kind of way where I'm going to make one thing and then never really do it type of thing, but more of a sustainable, like, hey, here's some things that I can be doing on a regular basis, and I can attach things on. I could hang things off this wall. I could build other
Right.
walls off of this wall. Things like that. What are your thoughts on that kind of
Oh
analogy?
yeah, no, I mean it's great. It's I think we touched on this briefly. Is that good architecture plans for additions? It plans for improvements. Bad architecture doesn't allow for it, and so that's something to kind of keep in mind. Is planning for the future, for the long term. It is going to take more time and energy, but you can also sort of set up systems to allow you to get there easier in the future. That's once again, this would be maybe like if you're scaling a mountain, right? Then you have landing stages, and we can't. And you were talking about it with the rebar sticking out and everything else. You can plan those in. You don't have to, go for the top of the mountain on your first try.
Right.
So this is something else about building out these structures and planning is having 5 and 10 and 15 and 20-year plans, considering things like your retirement along the way or things like that. You can actually plan for these eventualities, knowing that they're going to happen at some point, and plan for an upward trajectory of your life. However, I would have to say, if you don't have a plan at all, I mean, you might get there. I don't know. I would assume at that point it would just be luck dragging you along.
Yeah. And I'll point out that, there is power in writing down your plans, right? And there are a lot of people who have some plans that they've had in their heads, and they've kind of gone, that's kind of guided where they went and things like that. And I myself, that's kind of how I had been largely up to this past year or so, is like, all right, I had these kind of, I call them almost like loose intentions. Like, all right, here's kind of my rough idea for how my career is going to go. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. Here's kind of what I'm looking for wanting to live and travel, do these things. But I hadn't necessarily written those things down. And now I'm in that space where now that I'm learning more about this and seeing more, and also I'm trying to do more, I'm realizing that I can't do more unless I add a little bit more structure, unless I write things down, unless I track them, unless I'm statusing them, unless I sit down every morning or every night or every week and I'm saying, all right, here's what I'm being intentional about doing. Here's what I'm trying to do. In another term Danielle would like to use is, here's what I'm trying to manifest. And being intentional about it, because by doing that and having that act of doing it and thinking about it and writing it down, it makes you much more likely to do it. And there are stats about that, something like, I don't know, it's like 70% more likely or something like that. I don't know off the top of my head.
It's a weird behavioral mechanism that we all have. And I remember watching this old documentary, and it was like Arnold Schwarzenegger or something talking about lifting weights or pumping iron or something. And he was just talking about marking each rep down that he was gonna do, and then crossing them off after he would do them, or each set.
Right.
And the reason being that it does something to your brain. You can see where you're gonna go, and then you take small actions, marking them off, and you get a sense of accomplishment. And this is just in a 5-minute window. You need senses of accomplishment to keep yourself going, much less your entire life.
Yeah, and it's the nice thing too about writing it down is you're then tracking it, and you can see and you can look back and you can see how it changes and evolves. That was one of the other points I wanted to point out, was things are going to change and evolve as you're building it. And there's one thing to have a plan and visualize it, see it in your head. Maybe you have it on paper. Maybe you even have some rendering, some drawings of what it looked like. Maybe you do some visualizing of what you think it'll look like in your head, which is good and is valuable to help you create and design it how you want it. But recognize that it's always going to be a little different than you intend and a little than in your head, and for you to be okay with that. And also, guess what? When you're inside of this house that we're calling your life, and the walls get put up, you're starting to put that structure in, guess what? It's going to look a little different maybe than you thought, or feel a little different when you're inside and you can see all the walls and you thought, oh, I thought this was going to be big enough, but it's kind of a little smaller than I thought it was. Or I thought this was not too big, but wow, this is actually a pretty big space. Have you had any moments like that where it's like, oh, this
I have
this
a
feels
lot of people
different?
say, wow, that's a lot bigger than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, okay. But
Oh.
So the adapting, building the structure of the walls to build things off of. Well, one of the other really important things that walls are used for is what, Ryder?
I'm totally blanking.
It's called a roof. It's called a roof.
Oh, I was thinking hiding from people.
A roof. And what purpose does a roof serve?
Oh, it sheds water, protects you from the sun. it does all those great, lovely things that, it plays a big role in climate control. It also does this fascinating thing where it actually ties the walls together, which is something people don't often think about. But the roof and the walls actually function together to strengthen each other. So this is sort of this envelope that you live within, and that's when you put the cladding around the structure. So that's sort of, that can be steel, metal, brick, whatever the heck it is that you want to clad your structure with. But those things sort of function together to also re-strengthen the architecture itself. So as you get sort of, I don't know, more fancy over time, you could upgrade your cladding as well, your envelope. Now, the roof serves a couple of purposes, and of course, now we're also trying to even put solar on top of our roofs. We're trying to find ways to use that real estate to actually power things or to give extra benefit or value add, right? So these become kind of rich resources. They're also very vulnerable, especially out here in Texas, to hailstorms, tornadoes, things like that. So, there's a lot of, it's also something you don't see. People don't often pay attention to the roof. And that means that it serves this amazingly important function, just like the foundation does. But because you don't see it very often, people don't spend a lot of time thinking about them. And that's kind of a fascinating analogy for maybe most of life, is that we're mostly encountering things in the grocery aisle that are put right at eye level, and we just think about what's right in front of our face. And there are supporting structures around us that are not only protecting us, but also stabilizing us.
Yeah, I like that on so many levels, and I think it's a perfect analogy. The way I look at the roof is it is the main thing, the main barrier for protecting the things on the inside. And that's from elements on the outside like heat, cold, rain, storms, all those types of things that, metaphorically speaking in life, maybe those are people that are trying to attack you, bring you down. Maybe that's your company trying to grind you down. Maybe it's your managers, your coworkers, all these people who make life so difficult for you. Maybe it's your sister or your mother or whomever it may be. Maybe it's a lot of these people, a lot of these things. Maybe it's just society. Maybe it's debt.
Yeah.
Maybe all these things are coming at you in this torrential storm, right? And that roof is that barrier that you get to put in between you and the rest of the world. And so I think that has the best parallel to mental health, because if you cannot control that, then you're going to have a much harder time regulating the inside, right? I really like the idea of climate control. And guess what? As the seasons come and go, like, you may be a little hotter, you may be a little more angry, you may be a little more elevated in that sense. Maybe you're a little cooler, maybe you're more cozy. You're going to go through these various stages as the seasons change, but having that roof and having those walls, having that insulation there to keep all of that more stable, that is extremely important.
Oh yeah, and coming back into the psychology of this a little bit, I was reading a book last night on man caves, and it was the psychology of a man cave, where they talked to a therapist about why people would build things like I've just built this massive workshop, and he talked about it a lot in terms of psychological protection. Over time, then sometimes you can start feeling like you're losing control of certain aspects of your life. Maybe you move into your house, but your spouse or somebody else has decided this is the way it should look, and you no longer have a space to put all your toys and posters or whatever the heck it is that makes you feel like you have some sort of ownership or agency in the world. And so increasingly certain people need a space to sort of like call their own and to heal. And it isn't about sort of fear or control, but it's about not building up resentment. And so that's kind of a fascinating idea too, to think about shelters as being these spaces that we can kind of control and nest and heal within. So the idea that you would have your own fortress of solitude, but it's not about just being alone. It's about having a space where you can heal.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And another thing that popped into my head was the way that a lot of roofs are built, at least here in the United States, is you have a bunch of shingles that you put on. And those are meant to last for a while, but they're not meant to last forever. Yeah. And guess what? Every so often you have somebody who comes along and says, hey, you just went through a really big storm, and I can see you've got all of these dents from this hail. Or, hey, you've actually haven't had that much going on, but it's been 20 years, and it's starting to look a little patchy. Let's work together, and I will work with you to help you put a new roof on. And I just like the idea of, like, you're building this thing up around you, but it's going to be replaced in the future. It's going to be beaten down. It's going to be ground down. It's going to be, not as good of a structure, right? But then you're going to replace it and you're going to put a new one on top of it that's going to help do it again. But most importantly, like, you have somebody who's helping you evaluate that. And so for me, that is making me think a lot of using therapists and doctors and things like that, and always keeping an eye on. And insurance adjusters is kind of the type of thing that's popping in my head, right? Like, having those people, making sure they're coming out and looking at it to evaluate it, because guess what? We're not always the best at evaluating ourselves. And sometimes it's good to have an expert come in and evaluate the thing for you and tell you, like, especially for those spots, hey, you don't get on your roof very often. You don't know this, but here are these things that are wrong with your roof. And oh, by the way, here's this stuff I saw on the rest of your exterior. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, no, this is. I think you need these people, life checks and hacks and balances and all these good things. But I think what we're talking about here too is maintenance, and some of it can be preventative maintenance. You can do certain things up front and along the way to extend the life of certain things. What is fascinating is we seem to be in a society now where people just want things to work, and they don't want to have to deal with the daily hassles of actually maintaining things. So when we get into things like roofs and shingles and all this, yes, it has kind of a duration or a lifespan on it, but also there's areas like sometimes you have to repaint your house every couple of years. Sometimes you have to restain the fence in order to increase its longevity. So there's a lot of sort of small tasks that might seem onerous, but it's weird to think that that is your entire life. Your entire life are small, onerous tasks. Brushing your teeth. No one wants to have to do that 2 or 3 or 0
Dishes.
times a day. Yeah.
Vacuuming. Insert things here.
Yeah. So, but when you do them, you tend to feel better about them, and it's an investment you're making in the long term.
Yeah. Well, I'm a really, maybe self-absorbed, right? But I'm really enjoying going through this building process and looking at and using it as an analogy to compare to life, right? So I would like to take this a little further and go to the next steps. But for today, we're out of time. So, but just to kind of preview some of the other things that may come after that, right? Like, we've got the roof, we've got the structure, we've got the walls, we have the foundation. We talked about the importance of building all of those things, how it may take a little more time. It may look a little different. You need to bring in people who are helping you throughout the way, the experts. You need to make sure to take away things that are detrimental to your foundation. They're detrimental to your structure. And all of those things we talked about, but guess what? There's still a lot left to do. We still have, what does the outside of the house look like? What does the landscaping look like? And oh, by the way, just because one person thinks it should look a certain way, does that mean that's what it should look like? What it means for you?
These are appearances, right? So those are one set of choices. It defines who people think they are as individuals, but we're not even getting into the guts, the plumbing, the electric, those kind of things that run throughout the building that are major issues, the air conditioning, stuff like this.
Yeah, so I'd like to keep going down this trail another day, perhaps tomorrow, perhaps another day. But I'd like to keep going down this trail to see what comes up, because to be honest, I mean, just for those of you at home, like, we didn't come up with this in advance. We just started talking, blah, blah, blah. And so hopefully it becomes some sort of useful metaphor for people to kind of think through the various stages. And then, of course, the other side of, if you're doing some sort of building, maybe you happen to be thinking through these things, right? But yeah, and then we didn't even talk about the design of the inside, the interior that you fill out, the furniture you put in. There's a lot more that we could get into there. And if you play Sims, I'm sure you have plenty of ideas and thoughts on that. But for today, let's go ahead and end with our challenge, which is something that we alluded to a little bit. But that is having some sort of plan just for your next day, for today. I want to encourage and challenge you guys to, and you could do this right now, right after we get off this, off this podcast. You can sit down and spend. It doesn't have to be much. It could literally be 5 minutes, and just say, "Hey, what are the things that I need to do? What are the things that I've got going on in my head?" And guess what? You probably have a bunch of things you're thinking about, but just getting it out of your head and onto paper or into some digital thing and saying, "Here are the things that I want to do." And then being very careful to, all right, what is the minimum that I can do? What is just a little bit? What are some of the first steps I
Right.
can do? I recognize this is a classic trap. I've fallen into it many times myself. Oh, okay, I'm going to do it. Now I'm going to do it. Now I'm going to do all the things. And I want the shed built tomorrow. And I want all of it to be perfect. And I know these things take longer, but I'm going to do them all. That's like the most classic trap that me and Danielle fall into all the time. Is like, we want to do all the things and then we're going to do them right now. So make sure you're very conscious about that. Just say, hey, today, if I just did this one thing, like that would be a great step, right? And doing that right now or some point today, or maybe at the end of the day today, you plan it out for tomorrow. I really like that idea of before you go to sleep, you plan out your day for tomorrow. I'm going to do this. And that way you can go to sleep, you wake up, you're ready to go, you know what you're going to tackle, and you know that you're going to do that. And then we'll worry a little bit more about the other stuff and the greater plans and the longer plans after that. But let's just start with today, because guess what? Every day you get to control today. You get to control the present.
Yeah, it's really maybe one of the only things you can control, right?
Yes.
Is the present moment, how you respond and react to things.
Yep. And then meanwhile, we'll be helping you trying to figure out more of your foundation and your walls and your roof.
Yeah, we should start building up some resources that will be a little library for you if you want them.
Yes. And with that, you guys have a wonderful Thursday. Bye.